this is Jonas from JJ Bell Carpentry, and today I've got to build another closet just like this one. So this is a duplex build, so what I do on this side, I've got to go over the other side and do the same again. So I built this closet out of untreated pine, got some Pacific Jarrah and some 12mm marine ply. This one's not quite finished yet, but I'm going to run you through the process of what I do to get to this stage, and then we'll go through all the details for the doors and the trim and everything that goes into making a built-in wardrobe like this. This is where the wardrobe is going to be, and to determine the size of the wardrobe, we've had quite a few discussions with the customer and figured out the door size and the approximate size of the wardrobe. Now I've got to sort of lock it in. So the way I've done it with this wardrobe is to just really put the bits out as in their place so I can sort of find the size that's going to work with the doors, because really it's all about the doors and getting the doors to work properly and be in just the right spot. So as a mock-up for doors, I've got a couple strips of ply here. So these are 770 ply, and I'm going to use 770 doors. They're going to slide, and I want to have, when they're closed, I want to have about a 20mm gap overlap here. So I'll put all that in position. Over here I'm going to have a double stud against this wall. Over here I'm going to have a double stud in this corner. Then the door jamb is going to be made out of this Pacific Jarrah material. So I put everything in its place. I've got my doors where I want them. I want to make sure my final face trim covers this crack in the plywood. So I'm factoring that in as well. So what I'm looking to do now is establish this outside corner. So I've basically got it here. The outside corner of my framing is just going to be here. But what I'm going to do is just add an extra 10mm this way. And then I'm going to pull a measurement here, so it's about 620 off the wall there, and I'll just go 620 here. So then what I can do is use my rafter square to square that out, and I'll establish that outside corner, and from there I'm going to project that straight up onto the ceiling. And that'll give me a square outside corner. Alright, so I've squared up this edge. I've found my outside corner of the framing. I've got my outside corner of the framing over here, and now I've put the cross of the laser right on my point, and that's projecting a line straight across to my mark here, straight across to my mark here, and then it's also going up and across. And on the ceiling I've got a cross up there which is directly above this point. So now I can go and mark the 3 points up there, and I can start putting my framing in. So I've got a raked ceiling, it's about 10 degrees, the ceiling, so I've had to rip a 10-degree angle on this glut. And to measure for my first vertical, I'm just going to measure to the short point, which will be on the face of this glut up here. So I'll cut a 10-degree angle on the top of that stud, and then a square cut on the bottom. So I've got 2 studs cut, so I'm going to pin those in place. I'm just pinning it together with my 16 gauge nailer, and then I'm going to put some screws in. I'm just going to screw it all together, so I'm going to attach this stud to the wall with 100mm batten screws, and I'm trying to hit the noggin here. So the way I found my noggin was I took some photos of this wall before the ply went on, and I held my tape measure up on the noggin and took a photo of the noggin and with the measurement. So hopefully you're going to hit the noggin. We'll see when I drive this screw in. I missed it. So there you go. Alright, so I've drilled a few holes here. I realised that my stud is there, so that was not a good spot to drill to find my noggin. But I've done a couple of holes just above and below where I thought it was, and I found it eventually. And then when I went 1200 up from this hole, I hit the next one. So, even with a good photo of this stud, I still missed it. But it's pretty important to get fixings into the framework, not just into the ply, and that's going to make this is a nice strong connection. Okay, so I've put a second stud here, and the top of this stud is going to carry my door header. So this is essentially a jack stud. Now to determine the height here, what I've done is just come and looked at this pocket door. So as you can see, there's a track, there's a roller carriage, there's the door, and I need clearance at the bottom of the door. So I've got 10mm at the bottom for clearance, the door height, and then I just measure from there down to the door. It's a bit over 50mm, plus an extra 2mm for the track, and then plus the thickness of a piece of jarrah. So I'm adding all those numbers together, and that's going to establish the height of my header. So I'm just double checking my work here. So I've got 10mm at the bottom of the door, 20/40 for the door, 55 for the track and the carriage, 19mm for my Pacific jarrah, which gives me a total of 21/24. So that's the height of my header. So I'm going to use a straight edge and a level to just bring my mark across. I'll get it nice and level, mark the bottom. So that will be where my header goes, and that should be nice and level. Put that in next and carry on. Okay, my header's in. It had a little hump in it which I put up, and I've clamped a block here just to hold it where I want it while I fix it. So I'm just going to tack it. Alright, I'm going to screw it together now. There's not going to be a jack stud at this end, but it's not really a load bearing wall, so it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to put 2 bugles in from that end, and that'll take the weight of the doors. There'll also be the door jamb underneath it to give it some extra support. Alright, so that's the basic frame. Now I'm going to put a second stud on the outside of this one. I'm going to put a rail along the ceiling, and then I'll also put a vertical in the middle of this just to connect it to the top rail, and I'll screw it from the bottom just to make sure it's nice and strong. This is my top rail. I put a 10-degree bevel on that end. So jump up, put that 10-degree bevel up in that corner, pull it tight here, and then just mark the bottom. So I've pinned this in place, and I know where my battens are underneath the plywood, so I'm just going to put a few bugles into those battens. Okay, I've got my bit here, it's got a bevel on top. I'm just going to slide it in, give it a test fit. It's pretty good. So now I'll just mark the top, and that'll be my cutout. Alright, so I've made my little cutout in the piece. I'm just going to pin it in place, and then I'll put a bunch of screws in it to make sure it's super strong. Good, I'll just check this. So I can see that this is pushing my header down, so I've made it a bit long. So I just trim a bit off the bottom. This framing exposed inside the closet, so I've just made sure it's nice and neat. I put screws in here on the faces here. I've put nice clean faces on the inside, and you know, stuff like this I've just hidden on the outside where it's all going to be boxed in. I've done the same over here, so it's all pretty clean framing inside. It's nice and strong, it's sturdy, it's fixed into framing, not just into wall sheets. It's nice and square against the wall. The one thing that I just stuffed up was my batten screws just poked through a little bit. If I'd put them on a slight angle, that wouldn't have been a problem. So I might just whip out these 3 that are a problem and put them in at an angle. That's a good tip. Whenever you're nailing, you can just go at a bit of an angle and you won't get a protrusion out the back. Alright, so I put this first bit of ply on. It's fixed along the bottom, the front and the edge, but it's not fixed along here. And I'm actually going to use the trim pieces and the shelves to fix it inside. And you'll sort of see why I'm doing it this way as I progress. But the plan here is to actually put a piece of spotted gum ply on top of this, so it's going to be a double layer, but I'm just putting this on because the spotted gum is only 8mm and I just want a bit of extra meat. And I'm going to nail the rails for the shelves onto this on the inside, so if any nails come through, they're all going to be hidden behind the final piece, which will be the spotted gum. So yeah, the next step is to start putting the shelves in. And it's important to be a little bit strategic about this. I really want to get this top shelf in first. It's going to go the whole way across. And if I don't put that in first, it could be a real struggle to try and get it in there. So I'm going to put that in first, and then I'll do a vertical partition. And once all that's in, then I can start to build my 4 shelves on this side, and this side will just be for hanging, so there'll be a rail in. So that's going to be the next steps. Okay, so I'm getting ready to put my first shelf in. Now the first shelf needs to be this top shelf, and I've established the height I want the bottom of that piece of plywood here, and I've done that by sort of figuring out how much space I need between the top of the door, and you got to remember there's going to be a pelmet on the front of it coming down to the shelf, so I need to be able to access that. So I've got my height established. Now I'm just projecting the laser beam from that height the whole way around, and I've got some offcuts of this Pacific Jarrah, so I'm just going to cut these to size. I'll put the back one in first, and I'll put ones on either side. I'll glue and nail those to the wall, and then I can measure and cut out my top shelf. Before I put this top shelf in, and that's just to put these trim pieces on. And I did that now because it's going to be a bit hard to do that afterwards. So the glue I'm using for everything is this Maxbond Fast Grip liquid nails. I really like this glue. It's not too messy. It's real easy to work with, and I just put dobs where I want them behind my material. And then all this stuff I'm just shooting on with the Makita 23 gauge pin nailer. Obviously this Jarrah is too hard for the pin nailer, so that's going on with the 16 gauge. So now I'm all ready to put this next shelf in. You can see here I've actually got a vent pipe for the bathroom in the wall here, and I've put a nail right where the pipe is, but it's just a 32mm nail, so I'm pretty confident that I missed the pipe. But you know, if there's a pipe in the wall, you're going to hit it if you don't mark it. So it was another mistake not to mark that. I've got my shelf here. I've just been cutting this with the track saw in the other room. I've got a whole video on cutting and fitting marine ply. I did all the walls in this duplex, so if you want to see my tips for cutting plywood, you can watch that video. Now this is going to be the hardest shelf to get in, so we'll see how it goes. Alright, so I've got that in. I'm just going to do some pin nails from the top. The 32mm brads with this, so my trick is just going to be to put them in on a bit of an angle so they don't pop through the bottom of my little gluts there. So I'll nail this off, and then I can start marking out for the vertical partition. Got a glut on the floor, that's nailed to the floor now. Got my vertical, which I put in the laser. Now I'm projecting this point up onto here, and I've just marked where that is. So that's going to be where the edge of the ply is. So now I measure and cut this bit, but I got to remember that this is sagging down a bit. So I don't want to measure at the front. I want to get the measurement from the back. And at this point I could also just sort of check and see how level my floor is. The floor is pretty good in this place, so I'm not too worried about it. So yeah, I'll measure the back, and to get that measurement I've got a little block, because it's hard to do internal corner to internal corner measurement. But if I put a block there, I can measure from the top down. Yeah, And I can see I've made a mistake here as well. I should have left a 12mm gap here. So I'm just gonna have to notch out that sheet of ply. Anyway, it's all right. All right, so this is my middle piece of ply, the vertical partition for the closet. And I'm transferring my measurement. I'll show you how I'm doing this. I've got my tape hooked on the end. Pull along to my measurement, 1582. And I'm putting one edge of the ply there, and then I'll mark the other edge. So that gives me my total measurement, and then I'll square it across with the rafter square and cut it with the track saw. So that should give me a pretty accurate measurement. Alright, so I've slid this in. I actually attached this glut to the ply before I put it in. So I'm hard up against my glut the whole way around, and then I can just pull it across to my mark, and that should be just exactly where it needs to go. This is in. I've just put a bit along the front to stiffen it. So it's got a frame around that side. Now I've kept this side free of any gluts. I've just got this temporary block there to hold the ply in place. And that's because there's going to be 4 shelves going in here. So I've measured from the bottom of the plywood, and I've got shelves every 300mm. So this mark will be the top of the glut and the bottom of the plywood. And then at the bottom I've got my first mark here. Now the bottom is more than 300, it's probably more like 450. And I've done that on purpose so you have a bigger area at the bottom. Now I've got my marks on the wall, and I've projected the laser around. So now the next step is to put 3 Jarrah gluts in, and then I can cut and fit my first shelf. And you can see I've got my laser tower here. Once that first shelf's in, I'll lift my laser up to the next line, put that in, laser up, put that in, just work my way up to the top. Now this is a good way to do it because it's a bit tricky to get the last shelf in, so by starting at the bottom and working my way up, I'm only going to have to struggle with this last shelf. The rest of them will go in pretty easily. Alright, so the first shelf is in. I checked it with the square. This side was nice and square, and as you can see I got a beautiful fit there. But then this side, for whatever reason, was not square. So I just cut this. I measured at the back with my marking block. Then I measured the front with my tape measure. And I just made sure that my cut that wasn't square was ended up in the right place. So yeah, now I just set my laser up to my next mark and repeat. Alright, so before I put this next shelf in, I've just done a few of the trim details in here. I've put on my cover strip, I've put on my corner beads, and I'm going to run a corner bead inside in this corner, and this is what's going to hold this side in place. So I'll nail this plywood from the outside into that. And then outside, once the spotted gum goes on, I'll put another corner bead outside. So it'll be sandwiched between the 2 corner beads. I'm also nailing this shelf down. So it's fixed in place. Now all I need to do is just put the front rail on. And then the final step will be to get some Jarrah strips and nail them onto the front. So that whole face will be behind a nice thin Jarrah strip. this is all done to this stage now. Got all the rails in at the front, they're glued and nailed. So the next stage is going to be to put the doors in and get them all working. And then I'm going to put a nose trim on all this to hide the plywood. I'll make it the same width as the whole thing together. And yeah, the skirting board's got to go inside, and there's going to be plywood go in the face here. And yeah, full trim out. So until the doors go in though, I'm not going to do any more on this.